A radical Israeli settler accused of killing a Palestinian in the occupied West Bank on Monday has been released under house arrest. Awdah Hathaleen, who was shot dead during the confrontation, was a prominent activist involved in the Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land. The film chronicles Palestinians' efforts to prevent Israeli forces from destroying their homes. Israeli authorities say they're investigating the suspect for reckless manslaughter and use of a firearm. The UN and human rights organizations say that violent settlers in the occupied West Bank often operate with impunity. I'd like to welcome Sarit Mikhaili, International Outreach Director of B'Tselem, a major human rights organization in Israel. So we have here a prominent Palestinian activist killed on Monday in the occupied West Bank. What are your thoughts on what has happened here?
So first of all, I think the terrible killing of Awdah, who we all knew personally, anyone who was active anywhere throughout the southern West Bank knew him, worked with him, saw him in action for many years, is, I think, a real example of the dynamics that we're talking about that affect all Palestinians on the ground. And these are the dynamics of settlement expansion, of state-backed settler violence, of settler impunity, totally provided and guaranteed by the state, by the army, by the police, and also the fact that Palestinians are almost completely exposed with no protection whatsoever from basically any sort of violence that Israelis wish to inflict on them. I know this is quite a shocking statement. It's such an extreme statement, but I think this is the reality that we're talking about on the ground in the West Bank right now.
What are, in your view, the consequences when you see what you call impunity against acts of violence like this?
So let me explain. Israeli settler violence has always been not just an expression of individual criminality, or, you know, some people have this fantasy of these crazy hilltop youths who are running around and causing problems. It's not that. It's a very seriously used, it's a very effective strategic tool that is used by Israel to empty huge areas in the West Bank of their Palestinian residents. Because when you use violence against Palestinian communities, you can just move them away from where they're living, especially if these are communities that have no protection. And this has been the situation for many years. There's nothing new about this. But what we have seen emerge in recent years, so especially with the government that is led now, the Israeli government that's led by basically essentially settlers, and the most extreme settlers at that, together with the terrible, kind of catastrophic trauma that happened in Israel on October 7th, and all of the resulting impacts on the disinterest of Israelis in the situation in the West Bank, the genocide in Gaza, basically the fact that Israeli settlers in the West Bank are allowed now to do almost anything they want with almost no public debate or criticism within our society. This has led to a situation where all of this violence that we've seen in the past has just been magnified and has received, it's not that it has received no official consequences or that there are no official punishments for settler violence. We know that it's the other way around. The army and the state and the police are actually supporting these violent settlers. They are arming them, they're giving them vehicles, they're giving them equipment, and they're primarily giving them legitimacy to do almost anything they want throughout the area in order to basically terrorize Palestinians into leaving their homes. And this is what has been happening in Audah's community of al-Khair for months and years now.
And I do just want to remind our viewers that your organization earlier this week was one of the first Israeli organizations to make these accusations of genocide in Gaza, something that the Israeli government has strongly rejected. And I also want to ask why you don't think that there's been greater outcry within Israeli society about settler violence in the occupied West Bank.
That is a very, very fair question. And I have to say, it's very troubling for me because I know that a lot of Israelis are actually shocked by videos and images like the one of the killing of Awdah Hathaleen. And a lot of Israelis are not supportive of what the settlers are doing in the West Bank, which is essentially using a lot of violence to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. But the problem we have right now in our society is that any sort of opposition, not just to settler violence, but also to anything the government is doing, is extremely limited. Like I described earlier, the shock, the trauma of Hamas's atrocities on October 7th led in some Israeli quarters also to Israelis to just not care anymore about Palestinians, or want to just completely detach and not think about these issues. And also the fact that there's basically a war happening at the moment with Israel committing what B'Tselem describes as genocide. I know the Israeli government is denying it, but we are very firmly behind our decision to name this as genocide. All of this is distracting people from the situation in the West Bank. It's focusing attention elsewhere. And remember, Israeli soldiers are being killed weekly, I think. The Israeli hostages are still have basically been held by Hamas, and have also been abandoned by our government. And many Israelis are thinking about all of these things and just don't have the ability, the time, the wherewithal to also focus on what is being done in our name in the West Bank. But our role as Israeli human rights activists and as people who are focusing, who are aware of what's going on throughout the West Bank, is to really talk to Israelis about the fact that these are similar policies in the sense that they're guided by the same logic. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the West Bank is guided by the same logic of domination, of Jewish supremacy, and of expansionism and takeover that also guides the genocide in Gaza.
These allegations also something the Israeli government would deny, but I did want to ask you more about your organization's work and perhaps also offer the context that many of these positions you've outlined really aren't representative of how most of Israeli society feels. So when you go out and try to convince people of the work that you're doing, what approach do you take?
You're absolutely correct. B'Tselem's positions are not mainstream positions in our society these days. I would say the dominant discourse in our society today is either to totally support what the government is doing in Gaza, and a lot of people are saying, after October 7th, basically, there's simply nothing we can't do, where this gave us permission to do anything we want to Palestinians. That's one part of the attitude of Israelis. And another part of the attitude of Israelis is just Israelis who just have other concerns or are just simply so tired and exhausted by the reality that they're just not able to look at what is going on and oppose it. And it's our role, and absolutely you're right in saying that we do not represent the majority opinion in our society, but it's still our obligation as Israelis and Palestinians, because B'Tselem staff includes both Israeli Jews like myself and Palestinians who are committed to the universal values of human rights and to basic humanity. It's our role, it's our obligation to keep speaking to our people, to speak truth to power. And we've been doing it actually over the last few days since the release of our genocide report, extensively, both with Israelis and also with internationals. And in the report itself, we don't just call on the international community to stop Israel's genocide. We call on all fellow Israelis to take all action that they can within, obviously, the framework of international law in order to end this. Because I think that if we look to the future, there are going to be Israelis and Palestinians living in our region forever. There is no way that one side can or should fantasize about wiping out the other side. And this basic realization, this basic principle is guiding us at B'Tselem to offer and to demand a different future. And that is a future that does not have supremacy of one side over another. Now, this can obviously happen in many ways. It's not up to B'Tselem to decide how Israelis and Palestinians will resolve their differences, but we are calling for an end to Jewish supremacy, to apartheid, and to the attitude that says that one side has to dominate the other. This is essentially our message. I agree that unfortunately right now in our society, we're in the minority, but we are going to continue to say this because we do not see how there is any future for any of us in the region if we don't change course, if we continue down this path of domination, of genocide, of mass killing, and of devastation. There's no future for any of us here.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on DW today. We've been speaking with Sarit Mikhaeli with B'Tselem.
Thank you very much.